Hi guys, and welcome back to our debate videos about responses. I will now be moving on to a strategic response and giving you elements you can look at when trying to attack an argument strategically. So to remind you about the difference between a strategic response and a direct response, a strategic response is going to be criticizing the argument by looking at it as a whole. We aren't necessarily deconstructing the argument or saying elements of that argument aren't true, but we are evaluating that argument as a whole to see if it's a good argument and if the argument in itself stands in that debate. Cool. So the different strategic things you can criticize in a particular debate are firstly the importance of that argument. So is that argument important? Do we care about that argument, or is that argument insignificant in the debate? If you're going to say it's insignificant, you have to say why. Why it's insignificant, why it's not important, and why it's less important than something else. The second thing you can critique in an argument is are all the elements of that argument present? So are all the links there? So in our last video, we looked at the example of the motion about punishing attempted and committed crimes equally. Now, a strategic response to the argument we constructed there would be the idea that most of proposition's argument only tells us that attempted crimes and committed crimes should both be punished. They don't tell us why it's so necessary for them to be punished equally. So we think there's a core link missing in their argument. So that's where you are criticizing, are all the elements of an argument present? Is the premise like a good premise or a false premise? Are all the links present in that particular argument? Thirdly, an argument could have a problem-solution gap, and we've discussed this before in our opposition responses to a proposition case, so please go back and revise what that response would look like. Fourthly, an argument can be assertive, so maybe the argument they made lacked analysis and lacked links. Once again, it's not enough to just be like, it's an assertion, therefore it's bad. You must show us where in that argument there wasn't like an analytical work done, and why the analytical work was important to the way the argument was constructed. So it's not enough to just say it's an assertion. You must show me why it's an assertion and where that flaw is. Moreover, you must then make sure that your response to that isn't assertive as well. So if you're going to claim another truth, you must prove that truth in comparison to the assertion you are saying you are making. Fifth, the argument could be a contradiction. Now, contradictions happen a lot in debates, and many debates are just like, there's a contradiction, it's so bad. But you have to tell the adjudicator why the contradiction is harming the case that the proposition or the opposition side is trying to create. So it's not enough to just point out a contradiction. That contradiction needs to be harmful to either their strategic line or to your case as a whole, and that's why you think that contradiction is important. So it's very important to explain the contradiction and why it affects their debate or affects their case. So another element of strategic criticism you can make to an argument is to criticize the logic of an argument. And an argument can have many different logical flaws. One logical flaw is called straw manning. Now, this is when you paint a team's argument to be different to what they intended it to be, and you remove nuances from their argument that you don't want to respond to. So, for example, in the motion about making people write a test before they're able to vote, if you got up and you were like, proposition is saying that unintelligent people should never be allowed to vote, that really wasn't your argument. Your argument was that information about policy is important in how we construct our governments, and we need to be able to test that. Just saying it's denying like people who are illiterate the ability to vote isn't actually the way they constructed your arguments and straw man their arguments. Another example would be in the motion we did about punishing attempted and committed crimes equally. If you got up there and you say proposition is trying to punish people for their thoughts, once again, that's not really fair to the way they made their arguments, because their argument was actually trying to talk about the idea that attempted and committed crimes are based on the very same premise of a person intending to do something, and we can attack that intention. But of course, that intention has to be something valid. So they have to actually go into a house with a gun. So we're not going to, punish them for thinking of going into a house with a gun. So if somebody strawmans your case, a very powerful thing to do is to then show why they've left out nuances in your argument and remake that argument to show why those nuances were important. Secondly, arguments can have a causation flaw. So this means that a team can assume that two things happening together means that they are linked together. So for example, in a debate about not allowing people who are not vaccinated to go to schools, the opposition argues that, people are valid in thinking that vaccination is bad because autism happened at the same time as vaccinations. Doesn't mean that vaccinations necessarily cause autism. So another example is a circular argument. Now a circular argument is when an argument, basically goes in circles and doesn't necessarily prove anything. So it's saying that poor people need to be able to vote more, therefore we give poor people the vote. Like, you haven't done anything with that logic, you've just gone around in circles. It's not proving anything in that instance. Another logical flaw could be a false dichotomy, where the one team says that, if you want this to happen, you have to make this decision, or you can't have A and B happening at the same time. And sometimes you can. Sometimes the proposition solution might not be mutually exclusive to yours, and there's no need for you to have to choose between both, and they're painting a false dichotomy on their side of the house. Lastly, an argument could have a golden staircase or a slippery slope. Now, this is when a team over-exaggerates their benefits and they're like, if we do this, the economy is going to crash and fall. That's a slippery slope. Or when they over-exaggerate the benefits, where they're like, everything is going to be great and we're going to move and there's going to be social cohesion for everyone. So you can point out the proposition or opposition are over-exaggerating the extent of their harms or benefits in a particular debate. The last thing you can do to strategically criticize an argument is to take an argument to its logical conclusion. Here's where you take an argument and you play it in a different setting, play it in a different environment, or look at the consequences of what that argument means. So for example, in the debate about punishing attempted and committed crimes equally, you can point out the fact that they would logically then not care if somebody was a mass murderer and somebody murdered one person. So that's the logical conclusion of their idea. Moreover, in the debate about voting, a logical extension of their analysis that government should be allowed to police what's important to people, and government should be able to determine what you are voting, but it's them you're voting in place. Now that's a flawed logic to have in that particular instance. So taking arguments through the logical conclusion and playing them in a different environment or in a different setting, or looking at the consequences of that argument in its extreme sense, gives you a better idea of the flaws of that argument, and pointing that out is important. However, you can't just do that alone, because that would make it seem like you're over-exaggerating the proposition's line. And that's not necessarily fair to them. So always try and do all the other elements in conjunction with taking the argument to its logical conclusion. So that's all on our video about strategic critiques of arguments and how you can strategically respond to arguments in debates. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you next time.